I sat in the walnut-paneled conference room with my palms pressed flat against the table, trying to still the shaking in my hands. The sound of laughter ricocheted off the polished walls like marbles rolling across glass. My father's gallery is mine, my cousin Gregory declared, his grin smug enough to make the chandelier tremble. The paintings, the estate, the brand name, Mara can have the knickknacks she likes so much. I think the ceramic cats are more her speed. The room erupted in chuckles, my aunts covering their mouths as though this cruelty were wit, my uncles nodding with approval. Even my younger brother Mark gave a weak smile, desperate to stay aligned with the family's golden boy. I stared at Gregory, then at the mahogany folder in front of Mr. Lang, our family lawyer. My throat burned with the taste of swallowed retorts. 10 years of work, of sweat in the back rooms of the Langford Gallery, of inventory spreadsheets and cracked fingernails from packing crates, all reduced to ceramic cats. My name is Mara Jameson, I said silently to myself, anchoring against the tide of their disdain. 34 years old, 10 years managing the Langford Gallery in New York City. The granddaughter who learned to recognize a Renoir brushstroke before she could multiply. The one who spent Saturdays helping my grandfather rehang exhibitions when the humidity warped the wood frames. But to them, I was still the girl who collected flea market figurines, too sentimental to run a business. Gregory leaned back in his chair, hands folded over his belly. Father always said I had the eye for value. Mara just has an eye for dusting shelves. I tasted copper on my tongue. The urge to speak clawed at me, but I knew better. Defending myself to this family was like yelling into the wind. They had never listened, not when I got my MBA at Columbia, not when I landed contracts with three up-and-coming artists who now grace the covers of Art Forum. Not even when I kept the gallery afloat during the pandemic. Negotiating with landlords and donors, while Gregory live-streamed wine tastings from his villa in Tuscany. Mr. Lang cleared his throat, the sound precise, cutting through their amusement. If I may begin the reading? The room quieted, though smirks lingered. He adjusted his glasses and opened the thick envelope. My late client, Mr. Charles Langford, he began, entrusted me with the distribution of his estate, including the gallery, personal properties, and collectibles. Gregory straightened, smoothing his tie. My aunts leaned forward. I clasped my hands tighter. The gallery, Mr. Lang continued, was not in fact held in Mr. Langford's personal name at the time of his passing. The silence was sudden and sharp. Gregory blinked. What? Mr. Lang set down the page. Ownership of Langford Gallery was transferred 5 years ago into the name of Mara Jameson. The air throbbed with shock. I felt my heartbeat slam against my ribs, but on the outside I remained still. What are you talking about? Gregory demanded, his voice cracking. That gallery has been in our family for generations. And it still is, Mr. Lang said calmly. Mara is family. Your grandfather believed in continuity under proven management. He executed the transfer in 2018, citing Mara's demonstrated stewardship during financially volatile years. I wanted to gasp, to cry, to laugh, but all I did was fold my hands tighter. My grandfather had seen me. He had known. Gregory's face darkened. This is a trick. Mara doesn't know business. The words were meant to sting, but instead something colder, sharper took root inside me. I lifted my chin. I've been running the gallery for 10 years. I kept it solvent while you were hosting influencers in Ibiza. Aunt Lillian sputtered, that's no way to speak to family. You're right, I replied. I should be more formal. Gregory, thank you for your years of minimal contribution. The gallery survived despite it. Mr. Lang shuffled his papers. Shall I continue? The room was silent now, their earlier laughter curdled. The remaining estate, he said, includes the townhouse on East 72nd Street, various securities, and Mr. Langford's private collection of porcelain figurines. He glanced at me. Tomorrow, he leaves the figurines, along with documentation and appraisals. Gregory barked out a laugh. See? I told you she gets the tchotchkes, while I inherit real property. But I was barely listening. My mind flashed back to my grandfather's hospital room 3 months earlier. He had been weak, his voice a rasp. The figurines, Mara, he whispered. Not just sentiment, look in the ledgers. At the time, I thought it was fever rambling. But now, watching Mr. Lang lift a second folder, my chest tightened with realization. The collection, he said, was last appraised at $640,000. Several Meissen pieces from the 18th century, a complete Royal Dalton set, and 3 prototypes from the early Hummel series, rare beyond measure. The silence was thunderous. My relatives gaped. Gregory's mouth opened, then shut again like a fish gasping for air. For figurines, Aunt Lillian whispered, Mr. Lang smiled faintly. Antique porcelain is a thriving market. Your grandfather cultivated the collection carefully with Mara's assistance. She has intimate knowledge of provenance and valuation. I remembered long afternoons cataloging pieces with him, learning the difference between biscuit porcelain and glazed, tracing maker's marks with my fingertip. Gregory had rolled his eyes and called them Grandpa's creepy dolls. Now they were worth more than the townhouse he was so eager to claim. Gregory's voice wavered. So she gets the gallery, worth millions and 500,000 in porcelain. And I get what? The townhouse, Mr. Lang said evenly, encumbered by a $400,000 mortgage. Laughter rippled, not from joy but from disbelief. For once, it wasn't directed at me. Gregory turned scarlet. This isn't legal. There has to be a way to challenge it. Mr. Lang closed the folder. Your grandfather's documents are airtight. He prepared meticulously. For the first time in my life, the golden boy had nothing but bluster. And for the first time, I had more than proof, I had power. I rose, smoothing my skirt. Thank you, Mr. Lang. I look forward to continuing my grandfather's work. I turned toward the door, then paused. And Gregory, if you want to see the figurines, you're welcome to buy a ticket to the next exhibition. Gasps followed me as I walked out. My knees shook, but each step felt like planting a flag. For decades, I had been the overlooked one, the sentimental one, the girl with dust on her hands. But now, the truth stood documented in ink thick enough to silence their laughter. The gallery was mine. And so was the beginning of the reckoning they never saw coming. When I walked out of Mr. Lang's office that day, the air felt different, lighter, sharper, like I had stepped out of a storm cellar after years underground. For once, I was not the footnote to my cousin's glory. I was the headline. But power, I quickly learned, doesn't silence whispers. It only changes their pitch. By the next morning, Gregory's voice was already trickling through the gossip lines of Manhattan society. Mara tricked grandfather in his old age, he told a donor over lunch at Le Bernardin. She manipulated the paperwork. The gallery was supposed to be mine. At a charity gala 2 nights later, I overheard my Aunt Lillian stage whispering, she was always good with computers. Probably forged documents. I wanted to laugh, but the truth was, lies have a way of sticking when they're poured over the cracks of long-standing prejudice. For years I had been the overlooked one, so it was easy for them to believe I had cheated my way to the top. Inside the gallery, however, the picture looked different. Our senior curator, Alina, approached me with careful hope in her eyes. So it's true? You're the owner now? Yes, I said, trying to sound steadier than I felt. Her shoulders relaxed as though she had been holding her breath for years. Then maybe we can finally make decisions without Gregory's interference. I blinked. Gregory never worked here. She gave a small smile. Exactly. But he always hovered, always boasted to patrons that he would soon be in charge. It made fundraising difficult. They thought we were in limbo. For the first time, I saw the gallery not just as my inheritance, but as a place waiting, yearning for leadership. I spent the next weeks buried in work. Contracts, audits, planning the fall exhibition. Every corner of the gallery carried my grandfather's scent of turpentine and cedar, and I let myself believe that he was still guiding me. At night, I unwrapped the porcelain figurines in my apartment. There were 47 pieces, each delicate as a secret. One evening, while polishing the base of a Meissen shepherdess, I noticed a faint etching inside the porcelain skirt. Initials and a year. CL 1943, Charles Langford, my grandfather. I turned over more pieces, hidden inscriptions, tiny and deliberate, numbers, symbols, dates. At first I thought they were random, but after 2 weeks of late-night cataloging, I realized they formed a pattern, a ledger. My grandfather had been keeping private financial records inside the figurines themselves. When I compared them to the gallery's official books, my pulse quickened. The figurines held proof of hidden acquisitions, anonymous purchases, donations rooted through shell buyers. Nothing illegal, just secrets. It was as if my grandfather had been building a second map of the gallery's true assets, one no taxman or greedy heir could touch. Why give it to me? The question gnawed at me. Until one night I recalled his hospital words. Not just sentiment, look in the ledgers. He had trusted me with the truth, and the truth was far more valuable than even Mr. Lang had known. Meanwhile, Gregory was not idle. He began calling journalists, planting stories. Mara's sentimental, she'll ruin the gallery, she doesn't understand business. Articles surfaced questioning my leadership. Anonymous sources hinted I was selling assets. Then came the sabotage. 2 weeks before our fall opening, I arrived to find crates smashed in the storage room, canvases slashed. Security cameras had been conveniently offline. The insurance claim alone threatened to bankrupt us. I sat in my office with my head in my hands, fury and fear tangling. That's when Alina stepped inside with another man, tall, bespectacled, carrying a leather satchel. "This is Adrian Cole," she said, "forensic accountant. He's helped other museums when internal disputes got messy." Adrian extended a hand. "I hear you inherited more than your family expected." I almost laughed. That's one way to put it. Over the next week, Adrian pored over the figurine records and matched them with bank statements and acquisition files. His verdict left me reeling. "Mara, your grandfather concealed nearly $10 million worth of artwork under alternative titles. He didn't want Gregory, or anyone else, to get their hands on them. The figurines are a code. They point to where everything is hidden. 10 million, enough to safeguard the gallery for decades." I felt the ground shift beneath me again. My inheritance wasn't just survival, it was armor. But secrets attract predators. Gregory must have sensed something because he escalated his attacks. Anonymous complaints to the IRS. A smear campaign suggesting I was embezzling. He even showed up at the gallery one night drunk, pounding on the glass doors, shouting that he'd sue me for stealing his birthright. I called the police, but they only warned him and let him go. It was Adrian who steadied me. "You don't need to fight him with anger," he said. "Fight him with paper. Paper is heavier than rumor." So I gathered everything: the figurine ledger, Adrian's analysis, Alina's testimony about Gregory's harassment. Piece by piece, I built my own fortress of documentation. When Gregory filed a lawsuit claiming undue influence and fraud, I walked into the courtroom with my folders stacked high. And when the judge asked for evidence, I laid it down like a gambler slapping cards onto the table. My voice did not shake. "Your Honor, my grandfather entrusted me not just with his gallery, but with his record of truth. And the truth shows exactly why he chose me." Gregory's face, red and trembling, told me he finally understood. His laughter, his insults, his years of coasting on entitlement, none of it could stand against the one thing he had never bothered to earn. Proof: the case was dismissed, but the war wasn't over. Outside the courthouse, Gregory shoved past reporters and hissed in my ear, "This isn't finished. You may have the gallery, but you'll never have the family." "We'll make sure of that." I straightened my shoulders. "Then I'll build a new family," I said. "One that understands loyalty isn't measured in inheritance, but in trust." And for the first time, I meant it. Because in Alina's quiet support, in Adrian's steady guidance, I had already begun to build it. The storm did not end with the judge's gavel. It never does, not in families like mine. Gregory retreated from the courtroom humiliated, but humiliation has a way of fermenting into something sharper. For weeks, he prowled the edges of my life like a vulture, waiting for weakness. Donors began to receive anonymous packets, scans of doctored documents, whispers that I was selling off priceless pieces to fund my lavish lifestyle. Lavish. I almost laughed when I saw the word. I still lived in the same modest apartment with a leaky radiator, still brewed my own coffee instead of buying lattes. But lies, dressed in enough velvet, can look believable from a distance. Alina called me into her office one morning, closing the blinds like we were conspiring. "Mara," she said, "the rumors are gaining traction. If we don't change the narrative, Gregory will." "What do you suggest?" I asked. She glanced toward the storage room. "Show them the truth. The figurines, the ledger, the hidden acquisitions. Turn his smear into your strength." It terrified me, the idea of pulling my grandfather's secrets into the light. But as Adrian reminded me that evening over takeout, paper is protection, yes, but paper only works when people see it. Otherwise, it's just dust. So I began to plan. We scheduled a winter exhibition titled Legacy in Porcelain, the hidden ledger of Charles Langford. The title itself was a blade. It promised revelation. It promised transparency. And it promised the one thing Gregory could never weaponize: honesty. I curated the show myself. Each figurine displayed beside a photograph of the hidden inscriptions, with Adrian's explanations of how they mapped to financial acquisitions. Visitors would walk through a story not of secrecy, but of foresight, how my grandfather had built a fortress of culture and protected it for the future. The night before the opening, I walked the gallery alone. The lights glowed on glass cases, illuminating delicate faces of shepherds, maidens, dancers frozen in porcelain grace. My grandfather's handwriting, enlarged on the walls, looked like a love letter to endurance. I pressed my palm against the cool glass of one case and whispered, "I hope I'm doing this right." The next night, the gallery was packed. Donors, journalists, artists, even rival curators pressed shoulder to shoulder. I stood at the podium, my black dress plain but my voice steady. My grandfather believed that art is not just decoration, I began. It is memory, proof, a record of who we are. Tonight, I open his private ledger not to shame him, but to honor his trust. The Langford Gallery has nothing to hide. Every piece here is part of our collective inheritance. Not just mine, not just my family's, but this city's. Applause thundered. Cameras flashed. For the first time since inheriting the gallery, I felt something close to belonging. But Gregory, of course, had to make his entrance. Halfway through the reception, he burst in with two reporters trailing behind like scavenger birds. His tie was loose, his face flushed with drink. He pointed at me across the room. "She's lying," he shouted. "She forged those notes. She's tricking you all with fairy tales. The gallery is mine." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The reporters scrambled to capture every word. I could have shouted back. I could have argued. Instead, I stepped aside and gestured toward Adrian, who calmly handed the journalists certified documents. Forensic analyses, dating of the porcelain, independent verification from experts at Columbia University. "Mr. Langford's records are authentic," Adrian said evenly. "Anyone who doubts is welcome to examine them under lab conditions." The reporters turned from Gregory to me, their pens poised. And in that moment, Gregory's fury collapsed under its own weight. He looked less like an heir cheated of power, and more like a desperate man shouting at ghosts. He stormed out, the cameras following, capturing not my shame, but his unraveling. By the next morning, the headlines were merciless. Langford Gallery heir implodes at exhibition opening. Visionary granddaughter reveals secret ledger, secures gallery's future. Gregory stopped calling after that. I heard through distant relatives that he sold the family house, moved to Florida, and began pitching real estate schemes that never quite landed. His name became a cautionary tale whispered at society luncheons. A man who mistook entitlement for destiny. Meanwhile, the gallery thrived. Donations surged. The porcelain exhibition drew record attendance, not just for the art but for the story, a story of legacy protected against greed. Schools brought children on field trips. Professors lectured about the interplay of art and hidden history. And me? I no longer felt like the forgotten girl at the edge of the family portrait. Late one night after closing, I sat in the director's office. My office now, with Alina and Adrian. We sipped cheap wine out of paper cups, the ledger spread between us like an old map. "You realize," Adrian said, tapping one entry, "there are still pieces unaccounted for. Works your grandfather bought anonymously that we haven't found yet." I smiled, feeling the quiet thrill of possibility. "Then we'll find them." Piece by piece. Alina raised her cup. "To new families," she said softly. I looked at the two of them, at the gallery humming with the ghosts of my grandfather's care, and felt something loosen inside me. I had lost the family I thought I needed, but I had gained the one I deserved. And when I walked through the gallery the next morning, the sun spilling across marble floors, I realized something. My grandfather hadn't just left me porcelain, or ledgers, or even a gallery. He had left me proof that love can be written not in words, but in trust. And trust, once given, is harder than porcelain, heavier than rumor, more enduring than blood.